Welcome to our webinar with Andrea Sanders, our from B0 and Zero Waste legend. I'm Ryan. I'm founder and CEO of Earth Hero. And today we're just going to spend some time talking about zero waste.
Woohoo.
So welcome,
Hey,
Andrea.
everybody. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so before Earth Hero was even started, I met with Andrea early on just to, we both live in Boulder, Colorado, and she was nice enough to have some coffee with me. And from the very beginning, it was so great to get Andrea's perspective on this whole sustainability issue and how she's approaching it, and has collected quite a following of people that she inspires around a zero waste lifestyle. So without further ado, I would love to start off by asking you, from your perspective, what is zero waste? What does zero waste mean to you?
Well, to me, I think of it, people can define it a lot of different ways, but when I look at it, I think of actually that term and what it's referring to. And it's referring to a type of economic infrastructure where we design things. So that's anything, like whether it's a chair or a couch or a computer or roller skates, we design things so that waste is not built in. And so in order for that to happen, we have to have a whole infrastructure in place, regulations and laws and infrastructures like recovery, and everyone has to be on board. So zero waste is actually referring to a type of economic structure, otherwise called like a circular economy. And so that's kind of that's what that actual term really means. But when you put it and so we don't live in a circular zero waste economy, it's linear. And so what we're trying to do.
And by linear, you mean a product's made, used, and then buried.
Yeah, take, make, and waste. That's kind of a real simple way to think of it. So when we design things, we're not designing it in order for it to circle back into infrastructure. It's kind of like how nature would work, right? So, but since the zero waste lifestyle movement's become kind of popular, it's sort of been redefined into more of an individual, what can we do on an individual level to reduce our waste? And so when you look at it that way, what I think of it is really this navigation. And so I always think of it as just, when I hear that word, I think of the economic infrastructure that we want to move towards, and not so much that it exists now. We can kind of have the mindset for it.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely get more into that, because I think that really what you're saying is there's an infrastructure that we really need to move towards that doesn't quite exist yet.
Yeah.
So there's a gap in where we want to be from where we are.
Yeah.
So before we kind of dive into that, I'm curious, what was your, there's a lot of concern and sort of anxious curiosity around this whole situation we're in with, the current status of our planet, and, what's happening day to day. You hear it in the news almost, I'm sure you hear it throughout the day. And even for people that aren't designing their lives around this stuff, we're hearing it almost daily now. Yeah. So what inspired you to to start B0? It's b0.org.
Yeah.
For everyone that hasn't visited her, she's got just a ton of awesome content at b0.org. But what inspired you to start that, really dedicate your day-to-day life into promoting this message and just kind of going all in?
Yeah. So my background is environmental education. So I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and I started volunteering at a local marine research center when I was 14. And I pretty much did that up until I moved out of the house. So I spent my early life teaching environmental education, conservation, whether that was in the marine field or the zoological field. And I also have a background in meditation. So I still do that, but I spent 10 years doing that. And one of the things I've learned when I was teaching, talking to the public about conservation, or like trying to get people to build relationships with the environment, is that we don't have there's just not a lot of information around that. We don't know how, we're very disconnected. And so I kind of saw this like disconnection, this like between ourselves and the world. Like it's kind of the natural world, like the biosphere. It's like we're here and nature's over there. And I saw this so much and throughout, you know, educating the public. And that's kind of where it all kind of started to form. So it was like this idea of trying to build relationships with the world around us. So I hope this is making kind of sense. It's sort of a lot of things that happened. But, and basically what happened was I was teaching at a wildlife facility, and this, I think it was, I was doing something with like teaching people about, you know, plastic bags and like, and wildlife being entangled in them. And so I went home that night and I did some research, and I realized, I found this actually first, I found this blog called Zero Waste Home. And this was back in 2007. And Zero Waste Home, if you don't know, Bea Johnson, she's kind of like the founder of the Zero Waste lifestyle movement. But she started this blog back in 2007, and it was basically her documenting her family's journey making less waste. So all of their trash for their 2 boys and her husband and herself was like fit in a mason jar for the whole year. And I saw this and I was like, whoa, like, and it was like this light switch went off for me, and everything that I was doing in environmental education already and all the things I was trying to do personally, like thinking of myself as an environmentalist, I was like, wow, like I never connected the things that I did personally, like my trash or what I bought or what I ate or any of that, to like what I was doing every day teaching the public about saving the whales or seagrass beds or whatever it was. That makes sense. So it was kind of like this aha moment for me. And that is when I was like, oh my gosh, this is all about really putting value back into the things that we use again. Like, you know, seeing that whether it's stuff or people or resources, that's kind of what's been missing. And I had never thought about it until I had stumbled on her blog. And that was kind of like the evolution of like creating B0, was kind of meshing my 2 backgrounds together in meditation and environmental education.
That's fascinating, because really what you're saying is living zero waste and really just living more sustainably in general is directly correlated to being more mindful in general. So, you know, just mindfulness kind of is a conduit to living this way. You know, you think about how you integrate, you know, the things into your life. If you're thinking about how that works into, you know, sort of the sustainability, maybe naturally it makes it easier to do so. You know, just being more mindful about what you're buying and what you're using and your footprint. Yeah,
for sure.
What would you say? And by the way, if we've got some help in the background here, if anyone has any questions, definitely, you know, how does that work? Message us, text us, and we'll make sure we get to those at the end. In the meantime, you know, what are some of your bigger challenges living this way?
I think it's just having an infrastructure that doesn't really support the like dreamy ideal that we all want to have, like as an environment, you know, is like, you know, you're kind of like, you're kind of, it's almost, maybe I always think about this, maybe this is a weird analogy, but like people who were living in like the, you know, late 18th, early 19th century, and like they could see like, you know, the onset of new technologies, but everyone was still like using like candlelight and things like that. I still sometimes feel like I'm in that like realm. So like I feel like, well, I'm kind of bound by an infrastructure and different circumstances that don't really let me do exactly how I think we should all be living.
You're not really like, living in a tent with a candlelight, right?
No, yeah. Like I have like a home, and like, you know, I'm not like weaving my own clothes or churning my own butter or anything like that. Like I still utilize our, you know, the platform that we all really have. And so I really find it is just like trying to navigate. And I think that's always the biggest thing. Is like I see the potential, like, oh, like I know we could do this and this would make so much more sense. And it's, you know, it would offer so much more to people and planet. But that's probably my biggest thing. It's just kind of bound in this linear infrastructure for right now.
So sort of the the gap between where you would want the world to be at this point, but compared to where it actually is.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah. And what about some of your followers? You have a lot of, you have a big, fan base. I'm sure that, you're communicating with them regularly. What are like the more popular challenges, I guess? Popular is not the right word, but maybe just, the things that you hear about the most that people are having a hard time with.
I think it's like access. It's like there's not, it's kind of lucky here because in the zero waste like community, a lot of people talk about bulk shopping or, going to farmers markets or storing stuff in mason jars, kind of like these things that have become almost cliche.
Yeah, you have a glass jar at home, right?
I do. Okay. I have lots of them. Yeah. So it's like those things, and it's good. But a lot of people, when I started all this, I was living in Florida, and I had a Walmart and a Publix. Like I didn't have things to go, or I didn't have access to stuff. And this was back in the early 2000s too. Like, it wasn't really a thing. And I think a lot of times the people I talk to, the most concerning thing is like, I don't have these things near me. And so, and that's just kind of part of it. And so like you can go online to like, Earth Hero, or you go to places like that, and people can get access to stuff too. But I think in general, it's just our cities and our towns are kind of situated that, for at least here in America, it's not always conducive, and it's sometimes weird. Like another thing people like will, like my family doesn't get it, or my friends don't get it. That's like a big thing too. It seems like a big hurdle, is trying to get people to understand, like people think I'm weird because I asked for a straw, or I'm bringing my own plates to a party or something like that. And I think it's because our culture doesn't think about waste. We don't think about it as like, a problem, or, and so it can seem kind of odd, and like, why would you even bother? Why is that even concern? Why does it even matter? So I think those are the kind of bigger hurdles, is like access, and just having these, not having the support around you, like whether it's family, friends, or even your community. Because that was a lot of when I first started, those were the same things.
So what do you say to people that, have their personal values they've articulated really well? They, want to take the values that they believe, meaning creating less waste, and they know how to, but yet are challenged by family, friends, and just sort of the where most of the world is around that stuff today. Like, what do you say to that?
That's a good question. And I think what people should think about is that a lot of really this idea of producing less waste, or putting more value into things, or taking ownership of things isn't really new. It's stuff that we did just a few generations ago. And so if we're talking especially to older generations, like maybe, well, I'm older now, but like your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or something, they most likely, if they were born before 1950, they lived in a world where there wasn't disposable things, where you bought stuff, it lasted, and you took care of it, and there was ownership. And so a lot of what I'm talking about is it's not so much about like the trash that you're making as much as that like how much we've devalued things. And so if you have a family member, like maybe they don't consider themselves green or sustainable, or they politicize something like that, then I usually come at it at a completely different angle and go and just right into that value. Like, we want to value the things we own and take pride and ownership and where things come from, our communities and families. And because really all this is about is resourcefulness and thriftiness and community-centered kind of things. And so that's the kind of angle I encourage people to talk to others if there's if they're misunderstanding things or don't understand it, is that in essence, like, don't we all want to value things more? Don't we all want to value like our communities more, and the food we eat and the things we wear and what we make? And that's really like the root of a lot of what I'm talking about. So that usually helps people to communicate these things a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, in my own life too, I'm typically on the forefront of sustainably minded as well around, my friends and family. And typically, say, we're out to dinner and then I'll, order a drink without a straw or something like that. And you get the look,
Yeah.
usually, from the server or from the people you're with. And at first it's maybe a little uncomfortable or awkward, but if you just kind of confidently articulate why you're doing it, and it can be sort of a source of inspiration in a subtle way.
Totally.
It's like, I'm not pushing those on anyone else, those decisions on anyone else, but and even if there's a little bit of resistance initially, it's funny because I've noticed once you learn this stuff and you start thinking this way, you can't unlearn it.
So true. Yeah.
There's a little bit of a delay in terms of seeing, your influence.
Right.
And not that, again, that's the goal necessarily.
Right.
In your case with zero waste, it certainly is. But I think the biggest thing is this gap of education too, or relationship with the way we consume on a day-to-day basis. So
totally,
I can see that being one of the bigger challenges.
Yeah, I think it's like, I call it like quiet activism, like those moments where it's like you are asking for no straw, or like, you go to a party and you just bring your own cup, but you don't like say anything, you just kind of like do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of that quiet activism where people, it's not like you're slapping like disposable cups out of people's hands, like when you're at a party or something. You're just kind of like doing it, and then people ask you, and then once they ask you, then you have this like platform where you can like, oh, curiosity leads to like knowledge and like, and inspiration, and it just ripples from there. So I always think that's like such a great way to like kind of advocate for what you're doing, is just kind of just do it confidently and be knowledgeable about it the best you can, and people will like start to like be interested, like, oh, why are you doing that? I want to do it too.
It's a ripple effect. So how do you buy stuff and live zero waste at the same time?
Well,
people have a lot of questions, and us being a marketplace as well, like that's one of the I think there's a lot of confusion around that. Yeah,
totally. And again, it comes down to that word again. It's like, you don't live in a zero waste infrastructure. So trash is going to happen. Like there's going to be things that we're like, oh, it has packaging, or it has a little plastic tag, or all this stuff. And it's like, we want there not to be that, like, because we hear that and we think like it already exists. It doesn't. Like that world does not exist. So when you're trying to like reduce or make less trash, you're realizing what that term means and why we're doing it, and then trying to navigate through. So you're navigating through a disposable culture, a linear infrastructure. And so you just be okay with, there's going to be, it's not a perfect system. You're going to have things that come in your life that is trash, has to go to landfill, probably can't be recycled, and that's okay. The idea behind it is that we're just, again, putting that value back. So if I'm shopping for things, my shopping is a lot different than it was like 10 years ago.
And what are some of those differences? Like, how do you approach this idea of like, I need a thing,
right?
And whether it's, something, maybe a gift, or it's for yourself, whether it's a necessity or even a want, because we do live in a modern culture where, there's a pretty thin line, I guess, between something that you need versus like you're a human being. It's like, well, I kind of want something, right? It's like, so how would the way you approach that maybe be different than someone that's not living a zero waste mindset?
So I think what I'll do is I'll think of like materials. So I'll look at a few things, and I'll look at materials of things, like if I'm buying clothes, for example, I personally like linens and like natural fiber, So I'll look for like materials of stuff. I will look at how it's packaged. I'm fine with things being packaged in some way if I can't avoid it. Like if it's a good product and I want it and I think, I'll get use out of it. If it's durable, reusable, it's multifunctional. Those are the things I kind of look for in a product. It doesn't have to have all those things. Like I'm not so stringent and restrictive where I'm like, okay, well, sorry, it doesn't meet my requirements. Like it's not fitting every single check mark. It just has to have some of those qualities. So yeah, it has to be a good material, or material I think is something that I personally like. Durable, reusable, I said that. Multifunctional, yeah. So that's kind of what I look for. And then do I need it? And so I ask do I really need this thing? Or, you know, and sometimes like, you know, like I sometimes collect like little enamel pins. Like I don't need those, right? Like no one probably needs pins, but if there's something that brings me joy, I like them. And so you have to think about like, you know, like, does it inspire me? Is it beautiful? Does it make me happy? You know, but like you have to really think about that for yourself. So you have to kind of get out of the clutches of like the over consumer and that impulse, and like just be thoughtful about how you're buying. So keeping those qualities in mind.
So natural materials, and you coming back to mindfulness.
Yeah.
You know,
so
if you have an impulse to buy something, before you reach for the credit card, and you know,
just pause for a second, like take a moment. Like, you know, usually if I really want something, you know, then like I know I want it. But sometimes like, oh, that's cute, you know, and then like I should just pause. Let me just wait like a couple hours, or maybe a day or a week, and then usually I'm like, I probably didn't need that.
Do you find yourself spending less money? Because one of the things that, you know, a common conception out there is that living sustainably in general is more expensive than not living sustainably. So how do you feel about that?
I mean, I definitely spend a lot less. I'm not impulse buying like I used to. And, you know, I am older too. So I know like if I told myself this when I was in my 20s, I'd probably have been like, whatever. But now I feel like I do spend less because there is that pause in between what I buy. But when I do buy something, it's something I know that I'm really trying to get the most use out of. And I'm not saying like everything I buy I'm going to use for the rest of my life. I might need it for like, I might use it for a year or two and then maybe sell it or something like that. But for the most part, there's definitely how I consume is I consume far less than I used to. And it's because I try to think about those things first, where I didn't consider that as part of, you know, a part of my environmental work. I didn't think of my spending or what I wore or what I ate or what I put in my body as part of what I did, like when I was educating people about. So that's like the biggest difference. And I think, you know, I mean, sometimes better things do cost a little bit more money. And so that's the kind of thing where it's not always going to be accessible to people. But I also try to think, you know, if I let go of all the frivolous things I was buying, I usually had, like, for example, when it came to clothes, I would buy all kinds of fast fashion type stuff, like $3 shirts, $5 jeans, whatever. And I realized I was spending more. Like if I totaled all my spending for that month for like cheap clothing, I could have just bought one nice, really adaptable, durable, lasting thing instead of all those multitudes of purchases that I have nothing to show for anymore. So that's kind of thing. We have to kind of rework how our relationships to consumerism. And that honestly looks different for everybody, you know, and that again, like where we live or how much money we have or, you know, social and economic things are all variables. But generally I do spend less.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear you say that, because that's been my own experience too. I always say, like, if you compare, you know, line item for line item, you know, a piece of apparel or clothing, most likely the sustainable version is going to be more expensive, but because you're minimizing or eliminating impulse purchases, right, that at the end of a day, a week, a month, a year, that in its totality, you end up just spending less and having less stuff. And I'm curious in your case, but you know, for me, once I've like shifted into that mindset, it's not like a compromise. It's a very natural, you know, it's not like you're like, oh, I really want that, but I'm not going to do it because it's not who I am. Or it's just like, exactly. You know, it's like a very, you know, organic kind of experience.
Agree.
Just sort of naturally evolves towards being the path of least resistance, right?
Mm-hmm, totally. Yeah. I'm not waking up in the morning and be like, okay, I gotta make sure I'm not making any trash. I gotta make sure I'm doing like the best thing. Like, you know, I'm not trying to like have like a certain, you know, like a label that like floating over me and like there's like making sure she's doing all those things.
It's part of you.
Yeah, it's just part of it. It's just like, it's what I want to do. And it's always, and I'm very flexible too. Like, you know, sometimes I learn different things and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to change my opinion on that. Or also, you know, this may not seem green to someone, but I like it and I use it. Like some people will say like, well, you use paper and you write in notebooks, like that's not sustainable. I'm like, well, you can link anything to something that's not sustainable. That's just, again, an infrastructure. But then again, for me, that brings me joy, and there's value in that for me. It's not, if there's value in it for me, if I'm considering those things, then it's worth it for me. So
the average American creates 4.5 pounds of trash every day.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating to me. And you keep mentioning, I noticed, like, I'm not perfect. I use paper. I wear clothes. Thank you for wearing clothes today. But my guess is you're creating a lot less than 4.5 pounds of trash every day.
Yeah.
And is that really what a lot of this is about? Is just moving, it's a movement towards, not necessarily an end goal. It's just, the end goal ultimately is, what would you say the end goal is actually? I don't want to make any assumptions here.
I think the end goal for me is that, honestly, there's like almost is no end goal. It's like there's always a continuation. There's always going to be evolution and things that are continuing. So for me, it's like I recognized I wasn't putting value in the things I used, and now I'm putting more value in the things I use, which naturally decrease the amount of waste that I make. So we don't have a trash can in our whole home. We just have a jar that's underneath our kitchen sink, and then when that fills up, we put it in a paper bag in our our main city bin, and so we take out that once a year. And so for me, like it wasn't like a race.
Wait, hold on, I got it. So one trash can per year.
Yeah, we wheel out the thing once a year.
Yeah. So not what
just our basic Boulder City. Bin, roll up bin.
Just wanted to clarify that, because for anyone that thinks that you're not, it might not be zero waste, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's drastically a lot less waste. So if we all, because those are again, like that waste is the limitations of a linear economy that we live in. Like I can't get around that unless like I completely give up so much stuff. And I also have different things. I have allergies to food, so there's a lot of things I have to get in packaging sometimes, and it's just stuff that you get, whether it just comes in, sometimes you can't avoid. And that's what I tell people, if we all made less waste, that's a big signal to how things are made and how things move in our economy. And so because we're always going to buy things, we're always going to use things. It's just that part just is a design problem. Waste is just a design problem, and so we're going to make waste. That's just what's going to happen. So
it could be a lot less waste, though.
It could be a lot less, and even you don't have to take it out once a year. It doesn't have to be like what I do. If you took it out I know some people. I used to take out my trash. I would have 2 or 3 bags a week. I was just I have neighbors too that their things are overflowing. And if we just reduce that, that's the awareness of right? It just goes back to that same conversation of value and ownership and understanding materials better. But knowing that you're never going to make absolutely zero.
Well, you brought up a good point, which is when you buy stuff that is designed well, to avoid being in a bag in the trash can.
Yeah.
You're actually sending a signal to the companies that are doing it the right way to make more of that.
Yeah.
And you're, it's the old voting with your dollar cliche, and that if the more and more people doing that, it's not only what you're buying, it's what you're not buying.
Yeah.
Isn't being replaced too. So to me, that's sort of the economics behind this whole thing. And over time, the more and more people that are doing that, that's what's creating the change too.
Totally.
The actual physical making of products and product design. So, another you mentioned the circular economy, and I'm curious your thoughts on that. And also, one of the questions I ask people, just because I like to geek out on this stuff, is asking people if they feel like they live a sustainable lifestyle and why. And one of the most the number one response to that is, well, yeah, I recycle.
Yeah.
So how does recycling fit into this?
Oh, recycling.
And also fit into the circular economy?
Gosh, I think recycling really got shoved on us like in the 90s, especially. I mean, I was an 80s kid, so it was like,
as was I.
Yeah, and so like, it was like such a big part of my childhood. When I really think about it, it's like reduce, reuse, recycle, and we had like T-shirts and like little earth glue. We just had a lot going around that was so ingrained in my growing up. And then for a long time too, when it first started, it was like, oh, my idea of recycling, as most everyday people's idea of recycling, is that you put your recyclables in a bin, they get taken away and turned into something else, right? Like that's kind of how we think of recycling, but it's not quite really what's happening, right? And so recycling is good. And I'm not saying everyone should just halt recycling, but we have to understand what exactly is happening, and that it is a business too, and it's especially in the US, recycling is complex. It's resource intensive, and it takes a lot to take something else and turn it into something else. It also requires new materials to be added a lot to old materials. And then also, we don't have a whole lot of products accessible to us that are made from recycled products. So if we're not buying recycled products, then there's no point almost in recycling, right? And so I think if people understand that, and also that we produce so much materials, that recycling in a lot of ways doesn't even make a dent in because we're producing so much. I think they're in the book Cradle to Cradle, which is a must read. They say that recycling is like an aspirin to our overconsumption, and the only way to reduce is to reduce our overconsumption, basically. So it's like a Band-Aid. So I think people should really be honest and truthful, like what recycling is and what's really happening. And there's a lot of things that are not happening that we think is happening. And so we have to be aware again. And it comes again back to like, sure, something might be recyclable, but would it be better to have something I can use over and over and over and over and over again, right? So I think I kind of lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I think in the end, recycling is something that is nice, but we can't rely on it as like that's going to save us or something.
And you mentioned something important too, which and there's some confusion around this because the words themselves are so similar. But
yeah,
buying recycled like products made from recycled content that is also recyclable.
Yes,
is a step towards that circular economy where at the end of life we're making that into new products, and it goes around and around like that. So
yeah, totally.
But yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because I think a lot of people think if they recycle, they can check the box and move on.
Good.
And yes, it's a piece of the puzzle, but maybe not the complete picture. So
yeah.
We have a question from Michelle. Have you had to change your diet in order to produce less packaging waste?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
And how, I guess, more specifically, because actually that's a great question, because I know in my household, we're a family of 4, and that we don't produce, we try to produce as less trash as we can, but I think food packaging is probably I know it's the biggest percentage of the trash that we do have.
It can be, food is always really touchy too. So, it's like, for me, it's like, I definitely simplified what I eat. So I try to make a lot of my things, but I'm not spending tons of time in the kitchen, like any more than 30 minutes in the kitchen, and I'm out of there. So I try to find things that are like, again, it's like access to, like, I can easily go, and our farmers markets open up this Saturday in Boulder. And then, I can go to Simply Bulk or go to the local grocery stores and find bulk type things. And I know even when I started this, I didn't have access to that. So what did I have to do? I thought about materials. So, if I was going to buy something in a container or something, I would think, okay, is this paper? Glass is probably a little bit better, but also sometimes can be more expensive. It can be very tricky, but my my suggestion is for people to rethink what they're eating. I eat a plant-based diet primarily. I know not everyone wants to do that, but and that makes it kind of a little easier because, oranges and apples and stuff all kind of come in their own packaging most of the time if they're not prepackaged. And then I use things like a pressure cooker and cast iron skillets and things like that. So I kind of make meals that are quick and easy and use kind of very basic ingredients. So, but yeah, food, changing your diet is very helpful.
Yeah, that's
and it's good for you.
Yeah, I think, and there are ways to at least reduce, maybe not the food packaging, but going to the grocery store and using like reusable produce bags, or obviously bringing your own bags versus, taking bags, one-time use bags from the store, buying in bulk, and there's ways to sort of dent that. Some towns are starting to have now these bulk, like you can go in, and get your coffee without, getting the packaging for the coffee. You can bring your own containers and stuff like that. I know that's a very new part of the movement, but it's, I think food packaging in general is an area that's almost like the last bastion of like, this needs innovation.
Totally.
So another question from Jenny, do you look at your carbon footprint, for example, in regards to diet?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's all part of it. It's like everything is part of that story. Like the food we eat, I mean, even plastic has a huge carbon footprint. Well, you don't even think about that. Think about the processes of that. Everything, I think in our culture, we want everything to be this or that. And if you're in the middle or kind of like, it's like, nope, you have to choose. And I think for me, it's like everything is interconnected. So everything always gets looked at, the food I eat, the materials I buy, I know that a lot of, materials there's a lot of resources being used to produce things and to produce food, whether that's meat and dairy and even monoculture. People kind of, especially like being plant-based too, people kind of don't really talk about how food is grown as much. It's just like plants. And it's like, well, no, their monoculture is extremely resource, intensive and also affects people and communities tremendously. And so we have to understand that, again, it's an infrastructure that is just off balance. And so we have to maneuver the best we can. And so, I try to do as much as I can too with the food I eat and the things I wear. And, we offset our house, with like Arcadia Power and things like that. So it's like wind and solar offset. But I am also realistic and realize that, well, I'm still a part of it. Like I'm still a part of it. We're all part of this same infrastructure. And even when I'm buying my dairy-free cheese in plastic, that plastic has a huge footprint as well. And it's going to continue after, because there's nothing I can do with that. You know what I mean? So we have to really kind of be aware that we have an infrastructure that is not going to support all of our wishes and dreams, and be realistic, but also and navigate wisely, if that makes sense, without being restrictive or too like over. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't want to like completely opt out and sit on the sidelines because it's not perfect.
Right, exactly.
And you don't want to freak out trying to be perfect.
Right.
But you don't want to feel like you're failing,
right.
Straddling between those two. So where do you think this whole, at this point, you've been in this now for a while, where does the whole zero waste movement go from here? And how do we accelerate it?
I think what's key and what I see a lot in just watching this movement grow from like the very beginning is that we really need to just understand how things are. Like we have to understand what that term is referring to and not redefine it too much where it becomes something different. We have to understand that we have to be flexible and not hold people to these levels of like, you're not following it all, you're banished, like that doesn't produce And I'm telling people this because I've spent so much time in the education field teaching the public and like all kinds of people these ideas, and that's the common thing is like there's either like people want it to be black and white. So I think going forward people need to read read all. We have a recommended reading list on our website too. All those books are really helpful, help you understand the infrastructure, the history of sustainability, the history of how we got to these things. So I think people become educated, and then be tolerant, be you know, not everyone is going to just be like into it, right?
Silent activism.
Yeah, be quiet activism.
Quiet activism.
And keep doing it, and realize we're kind of pioneers and in this in a lot of ways. Even though we lived in a culture a few decades ago that didn't have plastic disposables and stuff, we have it now, and we're gonna disengage as much as possible. And so creates flexibility, space. I think that is the most thing. If I could advise people moving forward, that would be the best way to keep doing it, is not create this kind of you're this and I'm better than you or kind of thing. I feel like there's a lot of that. It can be, and so that I think holds the movements back, because then I don't know. I feel like it holds. I think if people can just be flexible and moving forward with that. And then I just want to see more, the conversation keep happening. I think that's the best thing I could want for it, is that the conversation keeps continuing. People keep becoming inspired, making changes and being okay that they're not going to be able to do it all. And I think just continuing that, because that's how anything has ever changed. It's just these increment, like little movements and ripples that continue. Yeah, and be okay with that. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. It's hard because I see kind of the commotion that can happen when, you know, we feel like we can't do it all. I don't know.
Well, you know, it's you know, for those that are, you know, that are listening and want to get involved,
yeah,
you know, have been wanting to get involved, but don't really. What suggestion would you have for people that, you know, want to start today? Like, what's the one thing, or, you know, the few things to just sort of opt into this movement, try it on, see how it feels without, you know, making any big compromise?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of little low-hanging fruits we can do, you know, whether it's just the little things like, you know, disengaging from single-use things as much as we can, building habits of awareness around that. You know, whether it's bring our own cup or saying no to a straw, bring your own cloth bags and produce bags to the grocery store. You know, making a few things if we can, if that's useful for us. You know, start with those little things, and then also sit down with yourself for a little bit and think about, like, what are my true wants and needs? What's meaningful to me? How can I put value into the things I use? You know, whether it's what I already own, or, you know, if it's something I'm going to bring into my life. You know, try to keep those things in mind. This way it's not so complex. It's not like, because I think that's that thing where people are like, oh my gosh, if I don't check off these things off, like, I just can't do it. It's not for me, right? But we all utilize the planet, right? We're all environmentalists in a way, because we're all breathing the air, drinking the water, using the land. So those are the things that are valuable. So how can we slowly kind of bring that into our world and develop better relationships with those things? And I think if we keep that in mind, that will open up our own way, our own path to create less waste, to think about how collectively we use the planet and we do things here. Yeah. It's kind of, it seems simple. There's not like always like a checklist or something like that, but it's more of this mindset that we have to kind of slowly weave into our world and our day in order to see things how they are, and then we also have to see what we can do to make how things are better.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, one of the ways that you know, that I've kind of approached it is, you know, anything that you use one time and throw away, typically there's a reusable option there.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
whether it's a water bottle or a coffee mug or food wrap, or, you think about, again, anything, use one time, throw away. A great place to evaluate, especially if that's stuff that you're doing every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another opportunity to save money, because you're going to, if you're using it on a regular basis versus buying and using something every day.
Totally.
So I don't know if there's, we have at least a few more questions we want to get to. And if there's anyone else that has any questions, make sure you send them our way, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. In the meantime, favorite zero waste hacks?
Ooh, let's see. Okay, so let's see. I don't know if this is a hack, but I've used scrap clothing. Like if an old shirt, I'll cut up into squares, and I'll cut up into small squares and big squares. And I've used those. I'll keep those in my bag sometimes because I'm always blowing my nose for some reason. And I'll use them for tissues, but not like, I won't use it for tissues and then use it for something else. You know what I mean? Dedicated tissue, it becomes that. Or you can use, like a scrap cloth and like wrap produce. You could do like the furoshiki style where you tie knots in the fabric and like creates like a little bag. I'll do things like that, like where I'll take something like kind of basic, like a piece of fabric, and like do a lot of things with it. What other, what's a hack? I guess maybe I'm older. What's like a good hack? I don't know. I'm like spacing out. Let's see. I always bring my reusable cup with me, and sometimes I'll just bring that, and then all of a sudden I decided to meet a friend for lunch and I have leftovers, so I'll use my cup for leftovers. Some people might think it's weird, but I'll use my coffee cup and stick my leftovers in there. So you can I always think of how many ways I can use something. What's like the most adaptable? How many ways can I adapt it?
Well, just always having a reusable water bottle that's something that I think most people could commit to. I know, it certainly works for me, and these days especially, there's more and more great filtered available water, most places. So it's not like the old days where you had to, fill up with some less than favorable tasting fountain water, and so it's getting more convenient as well there. But
having those little things with you, whether it's a reusable bottle or a coffee cup or a mug or a little fork. Like I have a folding fork and stuff like that I always have with me, and it's useful.
Well, this is a great question from Jessica, and something that being in Boulder, Boulder, Colorado, we have so much access to a sustainable infrastructure. But Jessica's question is, how can we begin to make small scale changes within a community that isn't very environmentally conscious? And I think, it's a great question because, there's so many communities that just aren't, as a municipality or as a community, I guess, investing in the necessary infrastructure to make it more convenient. So what do you do if you're on an island?
I used to live on an island, like in that kind of where I lived in a community that no one, this is how like it was when I first started. I went to a local grocery store. I lived in Central Florida, and I just started like thinking about this and trying to do things. And I bought these canvas grocery bags. That was like one of my first things I did. And I took them to the grocery store and I gave them to the bagger. And the next thing he did was put the canvas bag inside of a plastic bag. And I was like, oh no, like, no, these are just for themselves. And it was at that moment where I realized, like, we have no idea about materials or things like that. So living in a community sometimes that doesn't embrace that or doesn't get it, it's complex. Like, it's hard. You kind of have to start small, start little meetup groups, maybe do a little cleanup, bring attention to what is there, find the little nooks and crannies. That's what I had to do. I on the surface, I thought where I lived was just barren. Like I don't have a lot of options. I'm just this is what I had. And then I would investigate a little bit more, and I found that there was this little like vegetarian restaurant that started a little like food co-op, or food like CSA pickup. And, so kind of like dig a little bit underneath like your community and see who's there. Maybe there's a farmer who wants to start a compost or, a composting service, like a farmer who has like composting available. Maybe there's something you can do to connect people to that farm. It's kind of, again, building community, because we've developed communities now that are very disconnected. And we also have, and just being honest, like environmental work is very politicized as well. So it can be very hard to do that. So you have to just start from the roots, from the ground up, starting little community, meetups, doing little things, like just the little things that will start creating ripples and gathering more people who are like-minded. Because no matter where you go, there's always people that want the same things. They also probably think, I don't have no one else is talking about this, so oh well. So kind of be that person and start bringing people in. That's kind of, go to your local government, go to like your community, your city council meetings, see what's happening, and see if you could bring other people to that meeting that may be starting something, like whether it's composting or recycling, because I know there's a lot of places don't even have the access to those things either. So you kind of have to start small and realize it's not going to be always easy and a little complex.
Yeah, no, and I think, like you said, I was going to add that as well. Going to your local city or municipality and just getting a quick coffee meeting with with someone and tell them you're interested, and maybe other people have come to the city as well. And like Andrea, you're saying, it's a fragmented effort. So how do you get the city or your municipality to put something out there and just see, hey, anyone that's interested in helping our community become more sustainable, let's meet at Joe's coffee shop Saturday morning. Yep. See who shows up. Maybe nobody does, but maybe people do. Yeah. And when you get a bunch of heads in the same room trying to strategize about that, it's amazing what you can create. Totally. The other thing, and we don't work with them directly, but TerraCycle has some programs where you can they'll send you community boxes to recycle certain types of content that can then be sent back to them. So you can essentially, it's almost like a franchised recycler. Yeah. I think there's some cost associated with it, but again, maybe the other thing is going to certain businesses that are sort of somewhat aligned with sustainability. It's built into their business model in some way or very close to it, and see if they're willing to sponsor an event or a program. So it's a good question. I think one more question we have is from Jessica. When shopping for reusable replacements, what do you look for as pros in sustainable production, sourcing, and shipping?
I always think about the materials. So I'll pick like stainless steel or glass over plastic. I will look for like the durability of something. Like, can I use it over and over again? Does it have a lot of pieces? Like, would I tend to lose kind of thing? So I kind of think of like how it would fit into my life. And then I also realized too that, a lot of companies, it's really hard for everyone to trace down where things always come from and exactly, because again, linear infrastructure, which is, it's just not always conducive to like knowing exactly how something was exactly made. And so a lot of that time, sometimes like, well, I may not know exactly, but I know I'll use this again. The materials are durable. They're, it's functional for me. You know what I mean? So it's kind of not getting too I'm not saying not to be concerned, but realize that there's only so much that sometimes businesses and companies can do. And so this is like the best option for them to bring it to you at this price, right? A lot of people are like, well, a lot of things sometimes are made in China. I'm like, well, most of everything is like, so we kind of have to just be okay with, we're a global infrastructure too. Does that make sense? So just give yourself kind of like space for that. And just try to find something that that will be durable and lasting, and
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think and you pretty much covered it, but I would just add that specifically, at Earth Hero, we spend a lot of time around material makeup, and everything on Earth Hero, has materials that we deem as natural, or, the more sustainable version of its alternative. And it depends on the product category.
Totally,
but,
absolutely.
With clothing, you can get very detailed to around sustainability, meaning it can be, or it needs to be organic, it needs to be renewable, meaning like hemp, or something that's very fast growing. So, organic cottons, renewable, or recycled content.
Yep.
So recycled poly. It's amazing you can buy clothes now made from water bottles.
Right.
They all have their pros and cons.
Yeah,
some take
absolutely.
more water, some have little, micro beads that, are battling, that spin off into the water stream. But again, it's a movement towards.
Right, exactly.
And, it's, I think with a lot of non-clothing lines, it's, look for products that are made with recycled content, because not only are you diverting landfill, but you're also keeping natural resources where they need to be. So you're not using new natural resources, you're diverting landfill. A lot of times it's a lot less energy to make something from recycled content. So that just be.
And you're supporting recycling.
Which creates more demand for recycled content.
Right.
And it all ties together to create what you've been talking about, which is a circular economy, a more an infrastructure that's going to support zero waste versus seemingly having to battle it.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
So one more question, and then I think we'll wrap up. But what do you do about groceries you can't buy in bulk? Are there any products or brands you buy consistently?
Oh, yeah. And then, there's a few things I do buy are in packaging, but I tried to buy things too that are either, like, if it's food stuff, like I'll try to find glass over plastic. That's not always possible, but generally I can find glass. Like, I'll buy this, kind of vegan mayonnaise or whatever. And I know you could probably make your own. I know you can make almost anything, but I don't have always time to make DIY everything. But I'll buy that stuff in glass. I forgot what the brand is. See, this is kind of funny because some stores, like bigger stores, might only carry the plastic version because plastic is cheaper to ship. And so some smaller stores I find only have the glass version of that. So for instance, like if you went to Whole Foods here, they only have the plastic vegan mayonnaise, where if I go to Lucky's, they have the glass. So we have to realize that there's a lot of, again, infrastructure on that. But that's one. Jovel, which is a pasta brand I really like. They have gluten-free pasta that tastes like pasta. I'm Italian, so I'm very critical of how.
I can't tell.
Can you tell? I talk with my hands. I try to put them down, but they just come back up.
That's great.
Jovel is really good, and they use 100% recycled box their box. And then how plastic has that little filmy stuff, like the window, and then some spaghetti comes in the film. They use compostable wood. It's a wood pulp material, and so you can compost that in your home compost or city compost. So I really like that brand. But then there's a lot of things that I know, if I'm going to buy a plant-based cheese, there's some that are cheaper than the other, but they still come in plastic. So I might find a plastic I know my city will recycle, either the tubs or something like that. And then, but you kind of have to, it's really varies where you shop and what's available to you. But I try to kind of look for those things all right, well, I know I'm going to make a little waste here, but this is the least amount of waste of this
to really
brand.
Focus on the recyclability or compostability of the packaging.
Yeah. And then just kind of, okay, well, this vegan cheese comes in plastic, but it's not that much, so that's good. I'm still so it's kind of you have to just pick your battles. Right.
Well, Andrea Sanders from b0.org. Definitely check out her Instagram page. So much awesome content. She's always on the forefront of all this stuff. Definitely follow her. And I guess, just one parting shot or any parting shots you wanna leave with people that are, looking to take these next steps, or just in general.
Yeah, I think, just everyone always just remember that it's all about how we can put value into things again, and be kind, be compassionate, be flexible, be tolerant, and know that there is no perfect one way right now, and just keep going forward with that good intention, and things will happen, and, you know, be okay with that. And that's all I have to say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank everyone for
Bye.
tuning in, and really appreciate it. Have a fantastic day.